Okay, so welcome back to the second video under 2D objects, second tutorial. This is kind of where we left off on the last tutorial. So if you haven't watched it yet, we showed how to make 3 different rectangles on different planes, kind of using a different path each time. We're going to start here, and then we'll start to look at some other two-dimensional shapes as well, not just rectangles. But there's some things I wanted to highlight to show you how you can actually make changes after you've already created your rectangles. We saw that we can make changes while we were creating the rectangles. We could change the shapes. But now I want to actually maybe go back to that original rectangle. Maybe now all of a sudden I realize, hey, that rectangle's too big. I need to make the one that's highlighted smaller. How do I do that? I can't click on it. If I click on it, like there's nothing I can really do. If I right click, a bunch of things pop up. I've watched yourself. The right click is a little kind of difficult to deal with early on if you don't know much about Fusion360. So I would just kind of leave that alone for a while. I'll tell you when we want to right click and what we're going to actually do. But there's 2 different things that have happened as I've made the rectangles. I'm going to go ahead and escape, get out of there. If I go over underneath my browser, I highlighted that sketches have popped up, but I only see sketches, right? If I turn off the yellow light bulb, all of my sketches that I can see on the screen have disappeared. They're not gone, I just can't see them. It's like if I turn the light out on the sketches. If I click on it and that light bulb is lit, I can see my sketches. Well, that's all of them. If I pull down the arrow, I now see that I have sketch 2, and when I hover my mouse over it, this sketch kind of highlights, so I know which one is which. I have sketch 3, and I have sketch 4. If I only want to look at my original sketch, which was sketch 2, I can turn the light bulbs off, and I can just focus on that sketch. The more complex my model is, the more sketches I have. And sometimes that kind of just looks bad, gets in the way of viewing the entire object, so you can turn them off. It makes it a little bit easier to see things. We're gonna do that often, turn off things so it's easier to look at our model. This isn't the only place where I've kind of documented what I've done. At the bottom, I made 3 sketches, and you can see that I have 3 different sketch icons. And I have this little bar right here. I can actually go back in time. So one of my favorite things about Fusion360, I can rewind by holding and clicking on that bar with my left arrow, and I can actually drag it. And if I drag it so it's right after that first sketch, if you notice up under browser, those 2 other sketches, sketch 3 and sketch 4, have disappeared. It's almost like they haven't happened yet. So I have gone back in time. And if I want to go forward in time, as I move 1 bar ahead, I see sketch 3 pops up. Oop, I did it again. And sketch 4 has popped up. And there it is. If I go ahead and left click and hold and I drag and I go all the way back to the beginning, it's like I never made any sketches. So anytime you want to edit a sketch or you want to kind of show people the process you went through, you can always drag this little time bar back and then slowly say, up, and then I made this sketch, and then when you move up, and then I did this, and then I moved up and I made this. It's really helpful, especially if you're working in groups, because someone can kind of rewind and watch the steps you took to make the shapes. And that might be helpful for them to make changes or to see kind of like where you're going as a group in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually kind of go back in time, and I'm going to right click on the icon. My mouse is over top of the icon on this bottom toolbar. I'm going to right click, and I have a bunch of different options that pop up. The one I'm going to use most often in this case is Edit Sketch. When I click on Edit Sketch, very similar to how I create a sketch, it orients me to the sketch, so I'm looking at it head on. And also the information about the sketch pops up. I see the dimensions, and those don't disappear, but I can't see them after I stop a sketch. Speaking of stop sketch, notice that that is another tool that opens up on the bar as well. I have to stop the sketch to say I am done editing it. So let's say I actually wanted this sketch to be smaller. If you remember, there's a couple ways we can do this. I can actually just double click on the lengths and I can make that 50. And let's say I want this to be, excuse me, I hit enter. And now I'm going to double click, left click on that dimension. I'm going to make that 25. I'm going to put them back to the way they were, 70. Excuse me, getting trigger happy, 70 and 50. The other way I can do it is with the sketch dimension tool. Even though I've already dimensioned it, I should, fingers crossed, be able to click, drag up. Oh, and there we go. Adding this dimension will over-constrain the sketch. This is one of those times where I've already told it how long it is, so to try to tell it how long it is again is telling it too much information. So in this case, the easiest and then the only way to change the size is to double-click on the dimension and change it to 50. Change this one to 25. If that's all I wanted to change and I think everything else is good, I can go up and hit stop sketch. And then if I go ahead and pull my little moment of time, right? This is kind of like my DeLorean, if you will. If I move that forward too, I can see those other sketches come back just as I designed them, and they are the exact same dimensions they were as I designed them. So the only rectangle that changed shape was this original rectangle. So it's a pretty cool way to go back in time and change some sketches. Remember, I'm going to go ahead and use my little time marker, and I'm going to go ahead and left click, hold down, and pull it back. I always want it to be in front of what I'm going to change. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to edit that sketch. Now here's a cool time where all of a sudden that edit sketch isn't available. I don't know if it's like a bug. I don't know if there's something about the way I'm clicking. This happens often. Usually what I just do is I hit escape. And if you notice, it's blue up there, up in my sketch for some reason. And I don't know why. I'm going to go ahead and escape. I'm going to go ahead and escape again. Notice it's not blue anymore. So now when I go back and I hit right click, edit sketch is available. This happens every once in a while. Your best bet is to just hit escape and try again. Notice this is that sketch number 3 technically, and it's the bigger rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and make it the same exact size as the one I adjusted. And I'm going to double click. I'm going to make it 50. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to double click. I'm going to make it 25, just like I did before. And now I hit stop sketch. And again, if I pull my little time icon forward, I now have 2 rectangles that I've changed their shape, and I have one that's a little bit bigger. So that's one way that you can kind of use the browser to kind of give you some control over your modeling. And you can use this little kind of time recorder down here in the bottom to go ahead and control your modeling. So that's kind of it for those 2 areas. We're going to continue, and we're going to look at some other ways to make some different types of shapes. So at the very top, we haven't talked about this yet, is a way that you can kind of like save your work. You can start some new designs, or you have some other menu options here. I'm going to do a new design, and it's untitled. I can go ahead and name it later. When I go to save it, it's going to require me to name it. But notice I have a brand new screen. This is a brand new infinite world with nothing on it. And my origin is turned off. I like to see it, so I'm going to turn it back on by clicking the light bulb. And again, I'm in 3-dimensional space if I move my view cube around. And I always start with sketches, and I have to create a sketch. Remember, I can only create a sketch on a plane, and I'm going to pick a plane. It doesn't really matter this time for some reason. I don't know why. I'm going to pick this little side plane, which is the left side. Again, I orient myself to the screen. I'm looking at it straight ahead. Stop sketch becomes an option. I'll do that when I'm done drawing, and my sketch palette opens up. I don't know, for some reason, high school kids hate these toolbars, and they immediately like get rid of them and move them out of the way. I always have mine open. I'd recommend you have yours open as well. Same thing goes for the browser. Whenever I go to see kids work, the browser is always gone, and I'm like, where's your browser? So you want to open that browser up and have it. That information is vital, and you're going to use it often. So this time I'm going to use circles. I bet you 90% of the objects that people make in my classes are just from circles and rectangles. Again, the circle option, now there's like a bunch of different circle options. The one I use most often, again, is the center diameter circle. I've also used some of the tangent circles as well. So we're going to go ahead and start with the center diameter circle because it's very similar to the center rectangle. I clicked on it, left mouse click, and the icon of my mouse changes. I now have this circle right next to the arrow, and I have those crosshairs are up again. And when I get close to my origin or wherever I want to be, it kind of snaps to it. It's smart. It knows, hey, this might be someplace you want to draw, and I do. Very similar way to the rectangle. I left click once. Nothing changes except for the words in the box. Specify diameter of circle. And I can start that by, again, I'm not holding any mouse button in. I've only clicked once, dragging my mouse. And I can drag it in any direction I want. This is where, depending on what your settings are, you might see a radius or you might see a diameter. Don't get those two things confused. And I can see on my circle that the arrows are drawn from, one end of the circle to the other. That is not from the middle to the edge. It's from one edge to the other. So that's a diameter. And the word diameter is even listed. So let's say I want to make a circle that is 50 millimeters in diameter, 25 millimeter radius. I hit 50 and I hit enter. So this time it is drawn there. It is drawn in the middle. And if you can see, a little new icon popped up to show me that it's a diameter. That's kind of like the little shortcut symbol for diameter. Just like before, since I haven't stopped Sketch, I have options to change things. I can double click on the distance and I can change that. Maybe I want it to be bigger, 75. The circle gets bigger. If you notice, the circle has changed color. It's now that weird green color that I see, not the blue. Again, that tells me that I have a closed sketch, that the lines kind of meet up. It's not open like it was in some of the earlier tutorials. And if that's a circle I'm happy with, I'm going to go ahead and stop my sketch. It kind of like reorients itself, and now you can see that I have this sketch. Again, sketches pop up onto the browser. That's new because I just created one. And if I pull the menu down, it's sketch one. I can turn it off and on if I want to or don't want to look at it. And then down here, I have something new in my timeline because I've done something. And the more I do, the more icons get pulled up onto the timeline. All right, let's try some other things with circles. I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a new plane, and I'm going to start over. This time I'm going to create a bunch of circles, and my goal is to kind of show you a couple different ways to do this. If you're ever going to try to make a cylinder, well, a cylinder is kind of different than maybe a pipe. A cylinder can be solid. A pipe would have a hollow middle, and it would just have thick walls. So in that aspect, you might need two circles, one inside of another. So again, with Fusion360, there's usually like 10 different ways to make shapes that drive some people nuts. I happen to like it. I'm going to pick center circle. This time I just pulled it from the shortcut because I use it often and it's up there. I'm going to click in the origin, and this time I'm going to make it 100 millimeters. I have a couple different ways to create a circle within a circle, and I'm going to go ahead and do all of them if I can think about it. I'm going to do another circle. I'm going to highlight the origin, and this time you can see, since I knew I was in the origin and it's a center circle, everything is kind of going to be centered on one another, and the distance from any point of one circle to the other circle is going to be equidistant around that circle. So in this case, I'm going to put 75 millimeters. And I'm going to hit enter. And now I have this circle within a circle. A new icon pops up. And I'm going to put my mouse right on top of it. And that icon is actually over in constraints, and it's concentric. Why is that important? Well, it tells me that my kind of circles are centered on one another. They share a central point. That's important. It also allows me to do that if I happen to have made my circle not concentric. So maybe I'm going to go ahead and under sketch hit trim. Trim, remember, gets rid of some lines. Maybe I made my circle not a center point circle, but a 2-point circle. And a 2-point circle is kind of just what it says. I click on one point, and as I begin to draw, I'm like in control of where the diameter goes. Now I wanted that to be 75. So remember, one way I can do this is not to try to drag and get exactly 75, which is going to be hard. I can just type in 75 right now. If I hit enter, I have now created two circles, and they're exactly the same size as the first two circles, 100 millimeters and 75 millimeters. But they are not concentric. And this would be like the weirdest pipe ever that would have a thick wall on one side and a thin wall on the other. So I want them to be concentric. I could delete it, go back to a center point circle and try to draw it again, or I could use my constraint. And if I click on the icon concentric, and I touch one circle and the other circle, it will go ahead and move the inner circles so that they share a center point. And if you notice, I hit escape to get rid of this icon. Right there, and I'm hovering over it again, you see the concentric icon has popped up. So I can either force it to be concentric after the fact, or I can design it from the beginning to be concentric. But there's another example of how the constraints help you and give you information. If you notice, a new sketch has popped up, and if I stop sketch, I can actually turn my view to see sketch 1. If I turn off sketch 2, and if I turn off sketch 1, I can see where sketch 2 is, and they are perpendicular to one another because they're on perpendicular planes. Also, if I look down in this bottom toolbar, I see that I have a new icon in my timeline. If I wanted to go back in time, it's like I never drew that circle. Oh, where'd my first circle go? Oh, I have it turned off. I have to turn that light bulb back on. I could edit it if I want with a right click, or I can just kind of see what my progression was and how I went about making my shapes in what order. All right. So we'll go to a new icon, sketch. I'm going to create a new sketch, and this time I'm going to work on the plane I haven't worked on yet, just to kind of give you an idea of how I can make more shapes. And under sketch, I'm going to go ahead and look at spline. Splines and arcs are ways that we can make lines that are curved. So I'll kind of give you an example of maybe what shape I want to make. I'm going to start with a center rectangle. And I don't really care what the size is, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in there anyways. I'm going to make this, let's say, 70 by 70. Okay, so I actually have a square, and now my goal is to kind of round off the square. So it has a square shape, but it has a round top. I can do that with an arc. Arcs are really cool. There's a bunch of different ways to do arcs. I usually stick with a 3-point arc. And my goal, since it's a 3-point arc, I'm going to go ahead and click 3 times. I'm going to click once on this corner. I'm going to click second on this corner. And as I pull up, I can see that an arc has been created. And some of you are looking at that and going, isn't that just half a circle? And you are 100% correct. It is. It's half a circle with a 70 millimeter diameter because that's the length of that line that it's drawn on. But if I wanted to, I could actually expand this arc and make it bigger, or I could make this arc a little bit smaller. It still has that bottom line that's 70, but now it's not quite so much a circle. But I'm going to go back to where it kind of was highlighted as a circle. And if I hit enter, I have my arc. And I know it's closed because, again, it changes color. But now I have like kind of 2 areas of this sketch. I have the square area, and I have the top that is rounded off. If I wanted to get kind of creative and artistic, I can use a spline to make a curved shape. In the spline, you got to just kind of play with it to figure out how to control it. But it's designed to be a line that bends, and it bends kind of every time you use the mouse button. So I'm going to start in this corner, and I'm going to click once, and I'm going to drag. This looks like a normal straight line until I click again. And then as I drag, you can kind of see that it changes shape and bends. So this is definitely a way to make more organic shapes. And the more I click, the more I have control over the spline. The less I click, the more it kind of adapts the shape to kind of where it thinks I want it to go. To get out of this checkbox, because every time I keep clicking, it wants me to keep drawing splines. You go ahead and you just click on top of the checkbox. So although it's kind of like funky looking, you see it's changed colors. That means it's a closed sketch. And if I want to go back, I can go ahead and drag some of these different bars to change shapes. And those are things you can play with. Every time you pick on a point, these little kind of like bars pop up, and you can drag them and twist them, and you can actually change and make those shapes more organic. So an arc is a little bit more geometric, like symmetrical. You have less kind of artistic control. And the spline allows you to make like some weird rounded shapes. And they have their purpose and their uses depending on what you're trying to model. You cannot go in and change a dimension on a spline. It never even gave you the option. So where I can go back and make this, hey, I don't want this to be 70, I want this to be 45. Oh, that was pretty cool. It changed the whole shape of the rectangle. Put that back to 70. I don't have that option. No matter where I click, the only thing that pops up on the splines are these little weird little kind of like bars that allow you to pull on things. So that's circles, arcs, and splines. And that kind of helps you make some different two-dimensional shapes. We'll end with one other feature. I'm actually going to go back in time to my original circle. And if you remember, the goal here was to make a circle within a circle. And I did that by drawing two separate circles. If I know I want the circles to kind of be concentric and in relation to one another, there's this really cool feature under Sketch, and that is called offset. It does not have to be a circle. It can be pretty much any shape you want it to be. But if you click on offset and you click on the line, you're going to have this option of making a circle within a circle or outside of the circle. So it creates another identical shape that is offset by a distance. That's the big difference. The big difference is I don't put in a diameter or radius. I say, how far do I want one circle to be from another? And it's really cool. I want to point out two things. I have a distance that is negative. How do you have less than zero distance? Like, you can't. So that negative sign doesn't mean less than zero. It specifies a direction. So right now, because of the way I've clicked it, negative means inside the circle and positive means outside the original circle. And that's all those signs mean. They symbolize direction. So let's say I wanted my circle. And if you remember, I think the first time we did two circles, one was 100. So if I wanted this to be offset and I wanted it to be 100, some people right now are thinking, oh, you should make that offset 25 millimeters. That's incorrect, because it would put 25 millimeters between this line and this line, and also between this line and this line. So it would be like adding 50 millimeters to the circle. So in this case, you want to think about it more like radius and less like diameter. How many people can divide 25 by 2? Hopefully all of you. I'm struggling because it's still summertime, and I like Fusion to do math for me. So up here in this offset position is where I can type in my distance. And I can type in math. 25 divided by 2. And when I hit enter, it will actually put in the right distance for me, 12.5 millimeters. If I want to go back and change it, just like any other dimension, I can just double click on it and I can type in my 25 to see that that is way too big. How do I know that's too big? Well, remember, under inspect, we've never used it before, but there's this nice little ruler. And when I click on measure, if I click on the line, it's going to tell me the diameter of that line is 125 millimeters, not 100. I can't do anything but measure with the measuring tool. So I can go back and say, no, I want that to be 12.5. Now when I go back and hit inspect, I click on my line, I now know that the distance of that circle, the diameter, excuse me, is 100 millimeters. So that's a cool feature under Sketch, again called offset. So you can kind of play with that if you want to make two shapes that are kind of one on top of one another. They're automatically concentric even if they're not circles. All right, that ends the second tutorial for sketches. Thank you very much.